Alright, I'm trapped inside the house today. Got a bunch of editing that I've been trying to do, and emails, trying to stay on top of everything, and I thought I would take a little break to do a video in the rumor mills. That's right, today I want to talk about the rumors about the Red Komodo 6K. Before I get into this, I just want to say the reason I'm kind of getting really interested in this right now is I'm looking to upgrade to a cinema camera. And so I'm kind of looking at what my next options are, or not just a cinema camera, but a new A cam. And so I'm looking at what my options are and what makes sense. So today we're going to talk about the Red Komodo 6K and how that may or may not fit in with my workflow. And I don't know, let's talk about it. Alright, so at this point we don't know a lot about this camera, but we know enough to make speculation videos about things that may or may not matter. So what we do know about the camera so far is that it's going to be Super 35 sensor. It's going to be newly developed just for this camera. As far as the Super 35 goes, they said it was going to be on the wider side of the Super 35mm sensors, but having a sensor that's designed specifically for this camera and not repurposed from another camera in their lineup, I think would be a really good move on their part. Now, in terms of the sensor, what we know so far is that it's going to have some sort of phase-detect autofocus, which will be great. It's also the first time Red has ever used autofocus in one of their cameras. We've heard nothing so far in terms of whether this is going to be a dual native ISO. So my guess is that it won't. It'll just be, they'll pick something, it'll be up to them, they'll figure it out, and we'd have to go with that. That's what we know about the sensor so far. Let's talk about some other features that the camera also has. Now, I know I talk a lot about Canon on this channel, but I do shoot with other cameras, and I do have history with other cameras. And one of those brands that I have a fair bit of history with is Red. So some of the first Red cameras I shot on were the original Red ones. And when those came out, I think we were shooting on some of the first production line cameras. So obviously not the beta ones, but all the cameras were numbered underneath. And I'm pretty sure the two that I was shooting on the most when I first started were around 60 and 80, right? And back then they even had names. I don't know if they still do that. I remember one camera that I actually bought with some friends back in the day. I think its name was Spike. So Red has kind of a place in my heart as far as cameras go. It was the first kind of real cinema camera that I dug my hands into. Not like an ENG camera that was being repurposed for cinema camera, but a camera that we're, using specifically because it took PL lenses. And so I got really familiar with that workflow from the beginning. So I have a long history of using Reds. I've shot docs on Reds. I've shot commercials, short films, worked on features. I've done a lot with these cameras. So the idea of getting another Red and one that I own to myself sounds great. Now, I'm also not really interested in overbuying for equipment that I really don't need. Oftentimes, if I need a higher end camera, it's only for a project here and there, so I will just rent because it's more cost effective. I'm not really going to get any benefit of owning when I can just rent cameras and lenses easily. So if I'm going to have a camera, it's actually usually like a slightly lower end, cheaper camera, something I can grind out for the day-to-day work. So for me, I more just need a camera that I can use for my day-to-day, right? So it doesn't have to be a higher end, expensive production cinema camera. It needs to be something a little bit more flexible and can do a lot more things. And that's where the Komodo becomes really exciting. So far what we know about this camera is that it can shoot 6K up to 50 frames per second in global shutter mode, which means that it's got an option to switch between global shutter and rolling shutter, so both of which have their own advantages. You want the global shutter for any sort of real action stuff. Anything you want, you're going to be moving the camera a lot, you don't want to see the rolling shutter. With the rolling shutter, you can take advantage of that with things like low light. Maybe it'll even have some options with higher frame rates, but you have to sacrifice to have the rolling shutter, so those are options. But we don't really know a lot about frame rates at this point. I've heard something teased about 4K 120p, which if it's a 4K raw image, that means it's going to be cropped in just slightly, like 20-30%. I don't know. I'm terrible in the math on this stuff, and frankly, this is not a scientific page. I am just nerding out here. And these are all, I'm assuming, being shot to the same R3D files, 16-bit color, which would be awesome. Now, so one of the things I'm finding really enticing about this camera and really interesting for me and what I do is that it would come with an RF mount. Now that is amazing because there's so many different things you can do with an RF mount, as opposed to, say, going with an EF mount that a lot of other cameras, or even with going with, say, like a Sony mount or just a standard PL mount. The RF mount, I think, gives you more options for mounting different kinds of glass. And by using the RF mount, that lets you use the Canon RF to EF mount that has the variable ND filter in it, which now means that you've got internal variable ND for whatever lenses you're using, which is really awesome, especially because you can still mount cinema glass through EF. So it means that you could be using lenses like the Atlas anamorphic lenses and still be having a variable ND that you can switch all the time. This is my switching of the variable ND thumb move. That's how it goes. And another thing that's really interesting about the RF mount is that Metabones just came out with an RF to EF speed booster, meaning that you can take your full frame glass and squeeze it onto a super 35mm sensor and gain a stop of light, which is a really great addition and option to have with your lenses. And then in terms of all the other things that are going on in and around the camera, it's using Canon BP style batteries. It's using CFast cards, so you don't have to use the red mags, which are outrageously expensive. I mean, CFast is still pricey, but it's a lot cheaper than red mags. It's got a 4K SDI out, which I'm hoping really means that you can output the downsampled 6K image out to, say, a Ninja recorder and have, 4K 60 quick times either as backup, or if, that's what you're wanting to produce it on, which has its advantages if you're doing long form things like interviews. That could be really great. One of the main downsides that I'm seeing from this is that the only audio input is still just that, it's just a headphone mic jack in, and those aren't great. They'll do. And I know this camera is not designed with audio in mind. It's purely for cinematic glory. That's what they're going for. And just for me, as a selfish interest, I'm really looking at cameras that have XLR inputs because it's such a key component of what I do. So it would be nice to have that. It would be nice to not have to always be thinking about workarounds and how I'm going to make that work and syncing in post and doing all that. Part of the reason I'm looking at getting a new cinema camera is so that I can eliminate that part of my workflow, is the syncing. I hate the syncing. Anyways, that's about what I know about the camera so far. It's looking like it may not be hugely weather sealed, but it might have something, which would be great. And having an option for autofocus and a red would be an amazing option. We'll have to see what happens. My guess is that they're going to be making an announcement in the next month about it. I think it's already gone into production. I think they've already been doing tests based on some of the things that they were saying a couple months ago. They were doing kind of their last round of tests, and then they were expecting that if it all goes well, they'd be in production, say around March. Production designs have already kind of been sent out and leaked, and you can find those on the old internets. This came out just the other day. So my theory, my guess is that around March, we're going to see some announcement, and hopefully by the summer, these things will be out and around. So I'm kind of in limbo, I think, in terms of what I'm going to choose, but I will keep you guys in the loop. Anyways, I actually have to go and get my kids. My work day's done. I hope this video was helpful, or at least you had fun picking apart what this camera may or may not be. Who knows? Maybe it won't exist, but I think it will. But how good will that autofocus be? Who knows? Anyways, that's all I got. I'll see you later.